Hey everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo, Wasserman, back for the 183rd Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We got a full boat here. We got 30 people on the line to start. And it's so much going on in the world that we will try and deal with. And I've been asked to deal with humor. That will be a great challenge today, let me tell you. We're joined by the great Andrea Miller. We're going to go through the four pillars of fascism, although we keep adding them. Today we had another well, actually, thankfully, not a Supreme Court decision, a court decision throwing out the stolen documents case against Trump. God knows what else is going to come on. Maybe they'll void all the rape convictions based on executive privilege. That's a good question. If you're the President of the United States, under the recent Supreme Court decision, are you allowed to rape people? Andrea Miller will give us the answer on that one as we go through that Supreme Court decision. We're also going to talk about the 2025 document for a total takeover of the American government. The retribution campaign, I guess, is a list of about 350 people that Trump plans to eliminate. And then we also had this morning, as I say, the documents decision come out of the court system. We're going to, in the second hour, we're going to be joined by the great Donald Whitehead with Joel Siegel, to talk about homelessness and that issue and how it all fits in to the extreme right-wing tidal wave that we're looking at now. We're joined by Tatanka Bricka, who's the chair of the KPFK radio board. A lot going on at Pacifica as well. Carl Grossman, how you doing? Wendy, Gary, so many other great people with us today. John and Margot are with us. But we are going to start briefly now. HEDY TRIPP in Minnesota, one of our great activists, wants to tell us give us a minute for an event that's happening in Detroit, and then we'll go to Andrea Miller to jump in on the Supreme Court decision. Go ahead, HEDY.
Okay, are you getting the shared screen?
Yes, Detroit's Olympic Uprising, a documentary.
Okay, so I'm bringing you back to 1963. This is when Detroit was bidding to host the 1968 Olympic Games. And what was happening was there was a collision between the powers that be and the civil rights movement. My husband, Dr. Luke Tripp, and his comrades were arrested and jailed for demonstrating against the Olympic project, because it would spend millions for the new stadium when the Black community in Detroit was facing racial discrimination. You can see there the signs. There's a lot of old footage in discrimination in housing and the deep poverty that Detroit was in. He was a student at Wayne State University and chair of Uhuru, that was an activist student organization. So if you are in Detroit on July 23rd, they will be showing a free showing of this. There's my husband, who's a professor now at St. Cloud State University. Sorry about the spelling. So at the University of Michigan, Detroit Center on Tuesday, 23rd, 5 to 7, followed by a roundtable discussion with folks that were part of the activism there. So
will that be available by Zoom?
Not yet, and I don't know because I'm not in charge of the documentary. But as far as I know, I think it's an in-person event. It's a free event.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, HEDY TRIPP. And as we all know, the Olympics wound up going to Mexico City that year, where hundreds of students or may have been killed marching there. And that, of course, is where the two guys famously got on the podium in their socks and raised their fists. And
Sluggo, they were arrested for disturbing the peace and booing the anthem. Just so you know.
Booing the anthem.
Yes.
That will soon, I'm going to guess that that's soon to be a federal felony, but we'll
Not in 1963. Okay.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, HEDY
Can you
TRIPP.
put the link in the chat, please? Thank you.
Yeah, put the link in the chat, please. All right, we're now going to go to Andrea Miller. Andrea, you had a webinar last week, and you sent me the link to it. If you could put that in the chat, that would be really great. It was recorded and Zoomed, and we can now post it. We'll post it at our various websites, and your focus on that, as I say, we're dealing with count them five, maybe more pillars of the ongoing fascist tsunami coming into the United States. Andrea, you want to start with the Supreme Court decision restoring the monarchy to North America that we threw out in 1786 and signed the independence in 1776, going to 1783. I guess it would be, that makes it almost exactly 240 years. I guess that's a pretty good time to go without a monarch, but apparently the Supreme Court wants to bring it back. So can you tell us about this decision? And folks, you're welcome to raise your hands and chime in with Andrea.
All right, great. I'm going to quickly walk through parts of this document, and the title of my presentation is Protecting Democracy from the Court. And what I did was I looked up the relative ages of the justices, and you can see we've got 3 Trump justices that are only in their 50s. And then we've got Thomas and Alito in their 70s. Robert is in his 60s. And then we've got the 2 women justices, Kagan and Sotomayor. So because these are lifetime appointments until and unless we change it, we really now are looking at everything that we can do to protect the U.S. from the courts. First thing the courts did was say, insurrection is not grounds to disqualify candidates from running for office, which is interesting because in several states, commission of a felony says that you can't run for office. And in many instances, well, in 3 states, you can't even vote. There were 4 trials, 34 counts falsifying business records. Then there were the national security documents. And then there's Trump v. US, presidential immunity, elevating him to king / I guess God with a small g. And then the state level charges, which the Supreme Court has not yet given themselves power to address. They're probably thinking about it. So when the appeal was heard by the DC court, that literally slowed everything down. There is an interesting book, Something's Rotten About the Justices Taking So Long on Trump's Immunity Case, or actually background reading. You can take a look at that. I'm going through this very quickly. Of course, Trump wants to dismiss the charges, and then he says a former president can only be prosecuted if he is first impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate. Well, he was impeached by the House twice, but he was never convicted by the Senate. So that tells us there is a problem with the way the rules work in the US Senate. So we've got a number of things that we are going to adjust if we want to prevent this from happening in the future. Greg, let me get done with this part, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. everybody, you're going to get this whole presentation. It was put together by the Alliance for Justice. There was an interesting comment that Harvey made, and it said, gee, does this mean that presidents would not be able to be convicted for rape? They would technically need to make that an official presidential action. It would need to be part of their official responsibilities. So when it becomes an official responsibility of the president to rape random women, then yes, he would be immune from being prosecuted. So it's interesting the way you need to hang upside down to try to make sense of these decisions. And then I love this quote: immunity is necessary so presidents can do their jobs without distraction or undue caution. So again, there is are we a nation of laws or aren't we? And are there not three co-equal branches of government? If the executive branch can do all these things, then why can't, if the executive branch can do all these things, why can't Congress? And as voters, we have the ability to impact the executive branch and the congressional branch. So kind of our path is to seriously take control of executive and Congress. So I will let you read a lot of these notes on your own, and I've got questions. So I'll take the questions, and then I will go to the part where I talk about what Congress can, in theory, do about it. So MYLA and Greg. Greg first, then MYLA.
Is
You're
Greg?
muted. Greg, unmute. Greg. All right, MYLA.
I'm ready to go.
Go ahead.
And thank you,
Yeah.
Andrea. I want to know, I watched the White House press briefing this morning, and a question came up that's been on a lot of our minds. One of the reporters asked about President Biden's plan to reorganize the court or to have you heard about that? And they said that, you know, it was too soon and we wouldn't talk about it now. But I'm wondering, what is it that has held Biden back from expanding the court while the Democrats have been controlling the Senate?
They don't control the Senate by enough. They need 60 senators to agree to expand the court. This is not something the president can just do on his own. Although theoretically, with the new rule, it would be an official act. So could he? It gets interesting. Yes. But again, Democrats tend to have a very narrow, reasonable view of what the law means. The other side seems to have an incredibly expansive view of what the law means when it comes to their activities. So it's very interesting. And again, the top line analysis of this decision obliterates the rule of law. The finding the presidents are above the law contradicts the very foundation of the Constitution. So I guess the question will be, since they have already said the president is king or God, whatever you want, then where is that limit? We don't know. The ruling is so ridiculous and insane. Greg, unmute, please. You're muted.
I don't hear Greg. Let me just say,
Greg, yeah.
Greg, are you there? let me just say that as a historian who has studied the Constitutional Convention long enough to think I might have actually been there, I will guarantee you that not one member of the Constitutional Convention would have supported this Supreme Court decision. Washington stepped down from power twice, and Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention, which went for 4 months in the summer of 1787, and did not say a word. He didn't say anything, but he showed up every day in uniform. It was scorchingly hot, apparently. But nobody who wrote the Constitution, and the Constitution of the United States is a pretty authoritarian document, actually. It was way to the right of what the American public wanted at the time. But nonetheless, this is so far beyond anything that the so-called founders would have agreed to. And just for the reference, by the way, the first real constitutional government in America, in North America, was the Iroquois Confederacy. And they had nothing even remotely like a chief or a position of a chief that had the absolute rule that these 6 judges, I'm not going to call them justices, have perpetrated here. It's insane. But there's no, I love how the right wing in the courts has claimed to be originalists. That was the Scalia rubric. They're interpreting the mindset of the founders. Nobody is saying this is an original decision, an originalist decision. This is directly counter to everything that the founders the white founders of this country, the white male founders of this country laid out. Nobody that the Constitutional Convention would have supported this. Nobody.
And Harvey, I'm going to say what we are looking at in the courts is an interpolation. They are interpreting with a very right-wing political lens and arriving at rulings and then attempting to reverse justify basic insanity.
Right. And you said that they refer to Donald Trump as a god with a small g. I don't think so. I think it's with a big G that they're referring to him. And this is really an infuriating and extremely beyond dangerous reading. That's not a reading of the Constitution. There's nothing there's Article 2 or whatever that they refer to, but there's really nothing in the Constitution of the United States that would justify this decision. It's not a constitutional ruling at all.
Right.
So,
as I said, Congress and the courts, although the courts basically are doing whatever it is that they want. So basically the courts have decided to act like God too, but it is supposed to be 3 co-equal branches of government. And right now the president is king. So I've got slides, what the president can do now. Again, it's what a normal, reasonable interpretation of the Constitution says he can do versus, all right, now that I'm king and God, do I go and do outrageous things and see who tries to stop me? So anyway, with a narrow reading, when we were a country of laws, the president could increase the role and the independence of the inspectors general to make sure there are rigorous and impartial investigations into misconduct and or abuse of power. He could reaffirm, and this would be an executive order, and presidents can always do this, the commitment to transparency in government operations. So let the public really look at things that do not pose a national security risk and help them understand executive actions, and then have a dialogue with Congress and congressional committees to come up with plans on how they want to oversee the executive branch, which gets interesting since the House is sort of mega-ish and the Senate is not. But anyway, he can
Not
work
yet.
with DOJ and develop legislation that clarifies what these powers are. He can establish more stringent ethics guidelines for all executive branch employees. But again, this is the executive branch, rules on financial disclosure, lobbying, post-government, and the acceptance of gifts or emoluments, and then engage directly with the American people and talk to them about what they think the president should do. Now, Congress is the body that actually can propose the laws for what the courts can do. So we've got one bill, the Supreme Court Ethics Recusal and Transparency Act, which requires that the justices adopt a code of conduct, develop rules or adopt the rules governing disclosure of gifts, travel, and income received by both the justices and the clerks that are at least as rigorous as House and Senate disclosure rules, and expand the circumstances under which a justice or judge must be disqualified, and requires establishing procedural rules prohibiting the filing of or striking an amicus brief that would result in the disqualification of a judge basically at any level. Now, institute term limits. We've got a number of Trump justices that are in their 50s, and again, they could live another 30 years and they can stay on the court as long as they want. So this has that during the first and third years after there was a presidential election, so this would be 2025, and then the third year would be 2028, they would nominate and the Senate would appoint and confirm one justice. And a justice would be allowed to serve 18 years. So that basically controls this. They're going to be on the court for life, wreaking havoc. And then finally, increase the number of Supreme Court justices from 9 to 13, the Judiciary Act. And the Supreme Court was established by the Constitution. Congress, and only Congress, decides how big or small the court is going to be. All right, Eric.
And by the way, the court has not always been 9 justices. It has been bounced around in the early days. Go ahead, Eric.
There have been 7 changes to the number of justices. This is not new. And the number 13 says there were 13 federal circuit courts, which is why we got 9 in 1869, because there were 9 circuit courts at the time.
Hey, Andrea, thanks so much for all your thinking. Lots of people, I think, are not aware that in Ireland, when they have a constitutional crisis, they've been using a 99-person citizen assembly. This is a group of people who are selected by sortition, so that there's the right number of Protestants and Catholics and men and women, etc. But they're not elected, and they get to really deliberate. It's called deliberative democracy. I'm interested if anyone wants to work with me on seeing how using a citizen assembly-like process to build a national consensus for what to do with our absolutely obviously out of control 6 supermajority, getting Democrats and Republican voters to agree that, well, maybe the next, president gets to appoint a large number of, essentially increase the size of the court, but will do that selection in a nonpartisan way, and then reduce the power of these 6 dramatically. People are not thinking about, I think, as far as I know, nonpartisan ways to address the problem, and citizen assemblies often come up with kind of centrist, sensible, thoughtful. The people act like they're kind of on a jury. So anybody who wants to think with me about this, I'm Eric at atd.eco, actionthisday.eco. I'd love to talk to people about the use of deliberative democracy like citizen assemblies to come up with a national consensus. I think having a citizen assembly that had more credibility than the Supreme Court would actually not be hard. It's a low bar. Clearly.
Right.
So
Of course,
I'll
in
put my
Ireland,
email address in the chat. Go ahead.
okay.
Sorry.
Of course, in Ireland, the Citizens Assembly always meets in a pub, which I think would be a big plus as well. Serving only Irish whiskey. Andrew, did you want to comment, or we'll go to Greg Gordon here?
Well, I was going to say that is a very,
There's
very
background noise.
interesting concept. So yes, Eric, by all means, get your information in the chat. Yeah,
Please.
exactly.
There's some background noise. I don't know whose it is. Greg Gordon, is that you?
Could be my
Greg.
fan. It's pretty hot here.
All right,
Yeah,
go
Greg,
ahead.
just
Is
make
it
your
too
comment,
loud?
please. No, just make your comment, please. When
Please,
you're
yeah.
talking,
Okay,
we
well,
don't hear
my
it.
comment, I'm sorry. My connection went bad earlier, but
Don't need to hear that.
no,
What's
right
your comment,
now,
buddy?
you want me to turn off the fan?
No, you're good.
It's
Go
fine.
ahead.
Just make your
My
comment,
comment
please.
is, where's the king? I'm trying to. Are you hearing me?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Right now, where's the king? The Supreme Court didn't give Trump immunity, they gave Biden immunity. Can't we make some use of that?
There you go. That's a good point.
Yes, it is.
I don't know what we want Biden to do here as an absolute dictator, but that's an interesting point. Andrea, you have some
And a
chat?
very true point. That is very true. Biden is currently president, and he has inherited everything the court did. And you will notice that the Republicans are claiming that it was Biden attempting to get rid of Trump, which technically, according to the Supreme Court ruling, would be perfectly legal.
Well, why don't we say let's talk about lock him up. But anyway, that's a very interesting point, Greg. Thank you very much. I did want to point out very quickly, and I know I submitted a piece to a magazine that included this fact, and they said that it inspired groans. So this may inspire groans in you, but the reality is that in the upcoming, as we stand now, the United States of America has already officially had a female president. And I will give the caveat that both Edith Wilson, the wife of Woodrow Wilson, and Nancy Reagan did run the country for a certain period of time. Nancy actually for almost 3 years, and Edith Wilson for 1 year after Woodrow had a stroke. But the reality is we have officially had a female president of the United States, and it was Kamala Harris. In 2021, Joe Biden had a colonoscopy, and he went under. Trump had a colonoscopy when he was president and refused anesthesia because he did not want to turn over power to Mike Pence. But Biden actually officially turned over power to Kamala Harris. She was president of the United States for 2 or 3 hours. And if he had not emerged from anesthesia, she'd still be president. But
She would
I
be
did want to
president, right?
I did want to point that out, and it's significant. No one ever talks about it, but she was officially president of the United States. Does Don Andrea, you want to continue, or does anyone else want to comment here and want to raise a hand?
Oh, no, I wanted to make it short, sweet, to the point, and I will give you the link to the presentation so that anybody who wants to look at it will be able to view it.
Okay, Lynn Finerman has raised her hand. Lynn, go ahead.
Yes, hi.
Hey,
Tony.
Lynn.
Hey, Andrea Beauty. I wanted to, I think this is sort of a shift. I wanted to talk about what Greg Palast emphasized on Dennis's program in the past week. Hi, Dennis. And that is that we have in every state now, according to Greg Palast, we have vote challenging. Vote challenging is available in all the swing states. And Reverend Jesse Jackson has requested, pleaded with Biden to use his executive power to suspend that until further consideration, discussion, notice. I would like to know what people think we ought to do about that, whether we can get a campaign to get Biden to do that, because these vote challenges disable voters of color, youth voters, people who are considered, shall we say, politically PNG, whatever. Any questions, any answers?
Here's the answer. You are going to run directly into states' rights. States are responsible for the management of elections. If there is no, and again, what would this be? This would be an executive order. There would be so much pushback and potentially riots if he tried to do that, because it is individual states, and the way they are doing it is what does each individual state allow? I mean, some states have early voting, some states do not. Virginia's got 45 days of early, most states don't. Some states allow same day registration, other states do not. Voter registration is controlled by the states, not the
Right,
federal government.
but you know, I mean, Palast even said that there was one woman who challenged 32,000 voters, most of whom were Black, and that passed. They weren't able to vote.
So again, people are going to have to re-register to vote when you're dumped off the voting rolls. But again, that means you are watching, are you on the voting rolls? And what state did he claim 32,000 were dropped? Oh, right, probably in Georgia.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the thing is, once you're
attention.
Yeah, but if you're dropped, are you able to re-register?
Yes.
So the best thing is to register same day as you vote, is what you're saying.
That's not allowed in all states, and Georgia is not one of those states that allows same day registration. Ray McClendon lives in Georgia, and Ray's got a response. Ray?
Yeah, that's correct. What Andrea's been saying. These laws are passed on a state level, and so only the states would be able to modify the provisions, which have been coordinated by the MAGA Republicans across several states. But the reality is, it has to be dealt with on a state-by-state basis. An executive order from the President of the United States would have no effect on the law in Georgia, as an example, SB 202, or the most recent SB 189. So what we've got to do is go on a state-by-state basis to deal with these issues. Here in Georgia, it's even more specific. We've talked about this before on how you've got to deal with the local election boards, which are county to county, that make the difference in how these voter challenges are going to be dealt with. They are targeting the largest metro counties and those counties that are in the Black Belt in Georgia. The metro counties have strong legal representation and adequate staffing, so they can manage and turn back many of these voter challenges from these vigilantes, as we call them. But the way the law is written, one challenger can, in fact, challenge upwards of 100,000 voters individually, and that's going to continue. But we need more people that have their eye on the ball on that in local election boards across the state. This is local battling that's going to go on hand to hand. This is not going to be something that can be dealt with by executive order. The only thing that would impact it long term is going to be the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. That will have an impact, but that's going to be legislation. And as you know, the president on last Friday indicated that would be one of his major initiatives going into a second term.
Yeah, if he gets there. Okay, thank you for that, Ray. Wendy and then Mike, and a brief Wendy, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, on the note that Lynn brought up and what everyone's saying, I've been thinking a lot lately about the potential for an uprising if people don't think that the election results are correct for whichever reason. And I'm really, and for a while, and I've spoken about this before, but it's so important now, overall voter empowerment and voter education from the beginning of the vote till after the vote, how things are counted. I think that if people were educated more on the entire process of elections, even not just the purges before they vote, but how a ballot might get thrown out because it's filled out wrong or whatever reason. There are so many little nuances that I think people are intimidated by, even though they're not that complex. So I'm talking with Ray Lutz and a few other people from that movement, and a lot of people in his group are actually very educated, again, on the entire umbrella of elections, not just the auditing aspect of it. So as it progresses, and maybe starting like a campaign of just getting people engaged in like little clips and little like sound bites of different parts of the election process so that the voters actually become a part of the system. And that way there's a voice at the table, and sort of like labor organizing, but more just voter empowerment, if that makes sense. So hopefully in the future we could more Ray and Andrea and everybody. Thank you.
I do want to
Thank you, Wendy. Part of what we do, but it's reaching voters. When we look at voters in the South, in many instances, there is no internet. In many instances, voters have no transportation. They can't get anywhere. So it really does become challenging reaching the voters most likely to be impacted.
Right.
That's exactly why. Yeah, the people involved in this consider all of those things, and that's a part of the whole umbrella of everything that would keep somebody from voting or their vote from being counted. I think it's all part of the same big problem that we get on. Thank you.
Yes, it is. And thank you, Wendy. And we are unveiling, and John Steiner and Margot, who are on the call, have been a big part. We have a new website to coordinate a lot of this, usgrassroots.org, with Andrea Miller has been instrumental in helping us set up. That's usgrassroots.org. If you can post that in the chat, Steve, it'd be great. And we're going to be ready to rock and roll with it very shortly. And then we'll have 50 plus organizations that people can refer to help with. Wendy, you compiled some of the lists, and we think it'll be a big plus, and we'll do a full unveiling next week on that. And Ray, it's really you've been raising this issue for 4 years now, you and Andrea, and it's really, really a frightening prospect. The mass disenfranchisement of, specifically targeted groups of people, especially in states like Georgia. And we will have Greg will make a presentation on his film in a coming gathering as well. Mike Hirsch, anyone else want to jump in? Please do. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Andrea and Ray were talking about. We don't have one presidential election. We have 51 plus, depending on how you count the territories and people abroad and all that. And they're all different, and they're all under different rules. And so that makes it very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all solution. One thing that came to my mind is that with the Help America Vote Act, which had a lot of negative things about it, forcing electronic machines on all the voters, there is an ability to entice the states to adopt policies. And that would require, I think, a lot of money allocated by the feds that they could make available to the states and even to counties if they were willing to adopt very specific protections for voters. And that might be a little bit of an end run around the problem. I was wondering if Ray and Andrea had any comments about that idea.
The only problem with that, you need to start with legislation first. Trying to throw money at the problem is not going to work because the Republican-controlled legislatures will circumvent that and use the money for their own devices. I mean, as an example, one of the specific things that happened in the law here that was not at the top of the list because there were so many egregious things in these laws. But one thing that was going on in Georgia in 2020 was that there were a lot of foundations and major donors who were making, and corporations that were contributing to local election boards to assist them in having the resources they needed to properly run elections. The Republicans didn't like that because a lot of that money was coming from center, right, or left-leaning organizations. So now the only way money can come into the state is through the state. And the state would then dictate how that money could be used. So as an example, Fulton County could not get, a big donation from Microsoft or from Google to assist in putting more resources into its election integrity and protection efforts. They did that in order to be able to continue to have, they meaning the legislature and the governor, did that in order to maintain control over all of the major metropolitan election counties. And so doing something similar to that, if you give the money to the state is going to dictate through its appropriation process in the legislature, and you're not going to get the result that you're looking for. Great example on that right now is there's hundreds of millions of dollars being held up for everything from school lunches to Medicaid expansion that was a part of different legislation federally that the states are not putting out because of Republican control.
Wow. Andrea, do you want to comment on that as well?
No. What Ray said, I agree with Ray. And again, that is unfortunately our sad reality. If the money has to go into, quote, the state determines how or if they will spend it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to specify, I'm not talking about like a block grant kind of thing. I'm talking about something with strings attached to it. And I do know that a lot of states have rejected expanded Medicaid because of ideological reasons. So there's no guarantee that they would accept it, but it is a way to maybe impose some kind of federal sanity on a lot of what the states are doing. And I know it wouldn't be a cure-all by any means.
Okay, let's move on quickly now. Thank you, Mike. Paul Newman raises his hand. Now I want to talk about the 2025 Mein Kampf document that we're looking at from the Heritage Foundation. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, well, you're doing good, and we got 57 people with us now, 58, including Dennis Bernstein, the host of the a great Flashpoint show on KPFA.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Anyway, my question is, doesn't the Georgia Supreme Court, are they also extremists like Brian Kemp?
Ray or Andrew, do you want to comment on the Georgia Supreme Court?
I don't
It's
know anything
conservative.
about. Oh,
Yeah, it's definitely conservative. What's the point you're getting at, though?
Well, I just thought maybe you could, you know, the ACLU or your organizations can challenge a lot of these vigilante voter challenges and everything. They're insane. And I mean,
Yeah,
I can't believe there are even laws that they allow that.
But they're lawful. Remember, all of this changed because of the Shelby County decision with the Supreme Court. We wouldn't be in this position but for that ruling. And so from a Supreme Court standpoint, the Supreme Court of Georgia would simply say that the state legislature has the right to impose laws that they deem appropriate for election integrity. And that's what they've always passed these laws under the guise of. I mean, we've always said that this is a solution in search of a problem. But that's not the point. The statutory legitimacy of it is there. It's just we disagree on policy levels. So it wouldn't be an issue that the Supreme Court of Georgia would have any standing to change. The challenge we have is how do we get back to the pre-clearance and other voting rights components that were struck down in Shelby.
John
Right.
Lewis.
Okay, now let's look at we've looked at the Supreme Court decision, and thank you for that analysis, Andrea, and more. We got three other pillars of fascism here: the 2025 thing, the Trump setting up a Bureau of Retribution with a list of 350 people, and at least no one has ever run for president of the United States talking about inflicting punishment or attacks on their political rivals. And then the question, will the right wing actually accept an election that is not won by them? We've already, and the Supreme Court now basically has refused to prosecute Trump for his role in September and January 6th of 2021. What's that mean for January 26th of 2025? Interesting question. But let's look at the 2025 plan from the Heritage Foundation. And there are I think there are about 100 groups that have signed on. One of the best known pieces of it is that they want to remake the whole civil service. Now, the civil service in the 1880s, until the 1880s, the vast majority of government appointments were political. It was, Andrew Jackson is the one who pointed in the spoils system in a growing, one of Donald Trump's great idols, in the growing federal bureaucracy through the 1800s. These were political appointments. And then in the 1880s, actually, one of the was an accidental president, Chester Arthur, who came in with Garfield. Garfield was shot. Garfield was a wonderful guy, by the way. He missed a lot not having him as president. But the civil service became, in many ways, Confucian. Confucius's great contribution to Chinese governance was that merit would be the criterion by which you would make someone a government official. You had to be competent. You had to be educated. You had to not have a political axe to grind. And this 2025 document basically says that government positions should be made by the president unilaterally on the basis of their loyalty to the president. It's staggering that this is now, the game plan, the Mein Kampf of the American right wing. We won't make it partisan, but the reality is that would totally transform our government. And back to what it was in 1828 when Andrew Jackson became, 1829 when Andrew Jackson became president. It's just a mind-boggling assertion that this would become the case in the American government. But that's and you would never in another climate up until now, no one running for president of the United States since the 1880s has challenged the civil service aspect of the American bureaucracy, American governmental bureaucracy. It has been an unspoken core assumption of our governance that people are appointed to bureaucratic positions in the government apparatus based on merit and based on the ability to read and write, not on does the president have their loyalty. It's staggering. The only, the most obvious historical reference I can come up with was that moment in German history when Adolf Hitler made the German army, the Wehrmacht, swear loyalty, personal loyalty to him and not the German state. That's the only analogy I can think of that has that. Now, there's other stuff in the 2025 document that we can go through, but the reality is that the Supreme Court now has also in the Chevron, reversing the Chevron decision. I don't know what the name of the decision is, but they have reversed the idea that federal agencies can interpret, have a certain leeway in interpreting regulatory procedures. Of course, the number one thing we think about, especially since the original decision references Chevron, would be about the environment. And what the Supreme Court has done prior to this one is strip the bureaucratic agencies of the government, which have been running with civil servants as opposed to political appointees, which is what they don't like. And the leeway, the judgment has been with the agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, which has had leeway to interpret the law for the benefit of theoretically for the benefit of the environment. And what the Supreme Court has said a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember exactly when the decision came, was that's no longer the case. And you've now already had a broad-based attack on environmental regulation. I'm sure Carl Gross knows about this. Environmental regulation being reversed based on the idea that these government agencies no longer have the leeway to act on their wisdom on what's good for the environment, what's good for the public. This has been stripped now for some vague accountability that the Supreme Court says now has to be enforced. So we no longer have an Environmental Protection Agency, if we ever did, that can account for global warming or other impacts. And it's all up and down the line. So even before the 2025 thing is elaborated into power, we've already had a lot of that happen with the federal bureaucracy stripped. Then I want to deal if anybody wants to comment on that, please do. But the third pillar here is the retribution. No president no candidate has ever talked about retribution against their political opponents. Hitler did. It was called Dachau. That's where political prisoners, Hitler's political opponents went to Dachau. And starting, by the way, with the trade unionists. It was the union people, the union organizers, not the Jews, although a lot of them were Jewish, but nonetheless, the first people that Hitler sent to concentration camps were organizers, union organizers. And but this has been very explicit. There's a guy whose name escapes me, who's been appointed basically to be the the commandant of retribution. And there's a list, apparently, of about 350 people, Trump's political, they may not even be opponents, they may just people he doesn't like, that are going to be somehow attacked with retribution. That's the word they're using, retribution. One person that's been prominently named has been on our call, and that's Jamie Raskin. He is at the top of the list, along with a Republican named Liz Cheney. Those two people have been named pretty prominently as on the retribution list. So this is, again, unprecedented in American history. The presumption, dating from the Constitutional Convention, has always been that you have a right to speak without fear of retribution from the chief executive, who now has, according to the Supreme Court, essentially absolute power. So then this has been raised: does the President of the United States have the power to assassinate political opponents? I'll ask that again. Does the President of the United States now, under the Supreme Court ruling, within the framework of the 2025 Mein Kampf and the Retribution Dachau Act here, can we expect Donald Trump to actually kill his political opponents? And would that be prohibited under the Constitution? According the best I can see, no. There's no prohibition against it. Eric Lazarus, you have a hand? Eric, go ahead if you want. So, we're all in stuns.
I think he has to use the military to do it. If he did it using unofficial channels, it would be a personal act. I'm sorry that's not as funny as it's supposed to be.
You think what? You think he'd have to use? Well, who cares? I mean, he'll have the army under his control, right? But the reality is that as I interpret the law, as I interpret the Supreme Court decision, the 2025 Mein Kampf document, the retribution clause here that he's pushing, with a name with at least 350 people named, including Jamie Raskin, who's been on this call. I'm sure Pramila Jayapal would be on that list as well. There's no pulling of punches here. Mike Hurst, did you want to say something?
Well, speaking very selfishly, it's sure going to make it harder for us to get guests for this Zoom if that happens.
Too late.
But seriously, speaking of guests, I just confirmed that Christian Nunez, who's the national president of the National Organization for Women, will be joining us next week. So please return to Zoom with us next week, and she'll have a lot to say about J.D. Vance and Trumpism and MAGA. She's on the front lines working for women's rights and for all of our rights. So we look forward to hearing from Christian again.
Right. Oh, good. That's great. She's terrific. Thank you, Mike. I do want to say that we have had experience with a list. Nixon did have an enemies list, but there was no talk. Nixon's powers were proscribed. I mean, at the time, the Supreme Court had not ruled, and he put out the line. Nixon put out the line: if the president does it, it's legal, right? But it was widely mocked. It was not written into the docket of the U.S. Supreme Court. And people actually wanted to be on Nixon's enemy list. It was a great piece of status to be on Nixon's enemy list. It was not 350 people. And, he did not go around killing people, which I believe, I don't know what Donald Trump thinks his powers would be if he does get elected, but it's clearly designed for him. And he's laid out this list. I don't know who's on it beyond Jamie and well, we're assuming Pramila, but certainly Liz Cheney would be on it. So this is to be taken very seriously. Steve Kaiser, go ahead, please. Anybody else want to jump in, please do. And I'll go to Wendy. Go ahead, Steve.
I'm trying to unmute. But
You're
can you hear
unmuted.
me? Okay.
You're unmuted, Steve. Go ahead, please.
Well,
Thank you.
Remember some things. I mean, Nixon's a reasonable focus of this. Saying in 72 in the overthrow of Salvador Allende, there was a military officer that they had to get out of the way first, and they were hoping to kidnap him. I think his name was Schneider. But he pulled out a gun and they had to kill him because he was defending himself. So I cite that as an example of, who was it, Mutombo in Congo?
Lumumba.
Trujillo in Panama. And there's so many, Mossadegh in Iran.
Mobutu was the guy in the Congo.
Mobutu in the Congo, right. So
Mutombo was a center in the NBA for I forget.
Yeah, Dikembe Mutombo. I was really grateful for him.
Yes.
The way he knocked off the Lakers in that first battle with the Sixers in what was it, 2001.
Right. I love how our GREEP calls invariably wind up talking about sports, but there you go. You said Mutombo. It's actually Mobutu. But yes,
Right.
I mean, or
all over the place. So this is constantly going on. We're getting rid of these leaders, and of course, it doesn't stick on us, or there'd be no point to do that. There'd be too much traffic for that. And then for that matter, you can extrapolate that certainly LBJ was involved in the cover-up of JFK's assassination. That's an absolute fact. His involvement is hard to say at this point. So anyway, that made me point.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. Wendy, real quick, and then we're going to move on. I don't know if Donald Whitehead has joined us. Mike, do you see him? I don't see Donald Whitehead or Joel
I've
Siegel.
been looking for him, have not seen Vlad.
Okay, go ahead, Wendy, and then we'll proceed. I want to talk also about the latest decision to dismiss the documents case, which happened this morning. Go ahead, Wendy, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a ton of thoughts on all of this stuff, on how it all.
Okay, what are they? Let's hear it.
Well, I'm just gonna plant some seeds and allude so people's
Okay.
you can for yourselves. One, Eric brought up the point about the military, and that's the whole thing. It's like, for any of this to go down, like, the police and the military would have to be on that side. That's a lot. It almost happened in the 30s with Smedley Butler, but that's a lot. So, what we're looking at right now is these huge divides. I even think that a lot of Republicans would vote for a progressive candidate if they heard the platforms. I think a lot of the things that push people to Trump are just they're being fed up with the establishment, which is the same thing that the progressives have been fed up with for so long, with the corruption, because you have the same people that are going to benefit from the cop cities and all these other things fund both sides, and they're profiting from both of these same sides. But I think, and I did want to say, because you'd sent that article, Harvey, and I didn't get a chance to get back to it, but they're comparing Trump with Hungary and their crackdown on journalists and all these things, and they reference the Pegasus spyware, but the Pegasus spyware is an Israeli company. And you just mentioned the appointees, which I really appreciate that point, and that's good to learn about. And I just discovered something myself, that the guy that was behind that bill to censor the death tolls in Gaza is a Democrat from Florida, and he was appointed by DeSantis to come up with this whole emergency management strategy shortly before that hurricane happened in Florida, where DeSantis looked like the hero right before his election. And he's actually, and this Democrat guy that worked with DeSantis is actually involved with the Matrix company that is the press company that is funding all the newspapers to protect FPNL and all the energy companies from being written about
Right.
falsely. So all of these things
Okay.
are tying together and the same people are benefiting. And here we are fighting each other against these militaristic prison system, essentially. So we need to get it together and stop fighting each other and stop the culture wars of what we assume other people are thinking and sit down at the table and listen to each other before we have a civil war. Thank you.
I think we're in the middle of one. I want to talk and now move on real quickly to this something again very unfunny is the dismissal of the document. Thank you, Wendy, by the way. The dismissal of the documents case, the stolen documents case. The classified documents that Trump had strewn around Mar-a-Lago. His favorite judge, Eileen, what's her last name? Dismissed Annan. Dismissed the prosecution by Jack Smith on the documents case. Now that one, she is not the Supreme Court, and that will go, but that'll eventually go to the Supreme Court as well, obviously. And what is the Supreme Court going to say about the classified documents that Donald Trump had strewn all over Mar-a-Lago? So we don't know where we're going to go with that either. It's a total nightmare. So we have 63 people with us. Dennis Bernstein, you have a radio show coming up. Are you going to be discussing any of this on KPFA tonight? Are you still with us, Dennis Bernstein?
I'm with you. Yes, I am with you. Can you hear me?
Yes. So we've got
the show tonight. It's actually going to be. We're going to play interviews we did at a recent meeting in Standing Rock with the International Indian Treaty Council. And if you want to talk about ongoing genocides and who's on which politician's enemy list, you might want to start with the indigenous communities. I want to say this, though. I've been listening, and I really appreciate this gathering every week, and I learn a great deal from it. I really do. But how would you define Joe Biden's enemy list? Does he know the enemies that he's killing?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Does anybody want to say anything about the fact that in the last 24 hours, over 100 Palestinians were killed with U.S. weaponry, compliments not of Donald Trump, but of Joseph Biden? Are they on his enemies list? His enemies list? Just think about what it means to lose one relative, even an older aunt or uncle, but to lose triplets, 9 members of your family, 18 members of your family in what is obviously an ethnic cleansing. This is the problem that the liberal left has in the United States. There's silence around this genocide. And it is a genocide, according to some of the key international scholars in this world today. I'm sorry, I have to say that because the bloodshed has been so vicious, and people are talking about, I see, Trump took a bullet. We need to think about who's paying for the bullets that are committing a genocide. We've lost our morality, our moral center, and we have nothing to say because of it.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. I did want not to jump topic, but before we lose track of it, you were with the indigenous, and I assume you're going to talk about Leonard Peltier tonight. Leonard's parole was denied, but there are those who believe that we still have a chance to get that reversed. Do you have anything on that, Dennis, on Leonard Peltier? Or maybe
yeah, I actually didn't go to Standing Rock. My team went. Our indigenous collective that contributes to Flashpoints was there. so I wasn't there. But all this stuff was coming up. And of course, the struggle to free Leonard Peltier is obviously has a lot to do with, again, the moral center of the so-called liberal left. The fact that Biden didn't wake up yesterday and free Leonard Peltier makes it very difficult for me to even think about the nature of the Democratic Party.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Don't mean
Dennis,
to beat a dead horse, but some Palestinians are still alive and they want to preserve their homeland.
okay, we'll go to Lynn Fireman, Mike Hirsch, and then we got Donald Whitehead with us. Donald, we're gonna with you, if it's okay with you, we're gonna meld into this discussion the horrendous situation with homelessness and how that ties in, because the homeless people in this country are certainly been beaten to a pulp as a campaign issue. Lynn Fireman, go ahead, and then unmute you, please, and then we'll go to Mike Hirsch.
Yes, I would just like to add to what Dennis has said, that strategically speaking, this situation that Biden has fallen into with regard to Netanyahu is, again, perfectly timed. It is strategically timed so that the rump does not have to take responsibility for all this violence, so that Biden gets trapped in the same way that Reagan trapped James Carter with the Iran hostage situation. And I think that nobody is holding Donald Trump responsible for how he set this up in his own term, with the moving of the embassy and with all the other promises that he made to Netanyahu.
Yes, and we know that Netanyahu loves Donald Trump and would do pretty much anything, including slaughter a lot of people to get Donald Trump into the White House. No doubt about that. Mike Hirsch, and then we'll go to Don. Mike, if you can introduce Donald Whitehead, that would be great. We're honored to have a great guest here, Donald Whitehead, and we're going to expand this conversation into the homeless issue, which is certainly as big a domestic issue as anybody is facing, and a horrible unsolved problem. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Sluggo. An absolute, and one of the smartest, most talented people that I know, and he's a tireless advocate for people who otherwise would not have a voice. And it's such an honor to welcome Donald Whitehead to speak with us. Please take it away, Donald.
Donald, you're good. If you can tell us the organization you head and how to get in touch with you right up front, we can put it in the chat, and then you can tell us a lot more.
Oh, well, thank both of you. And Mike, thank you so much for that warm introduction. And good evening, everyone. Donald Whitehead. I am the executive director for the National Coalition for the Homeless. We are the oldest advocacy group that works on issues around homelessness. We actually wrote and introduced with congressional help the McKinney-Vento Act way back in 1982, and it's still the primary source of funding for homeless programs, shelters, and transitional and permanent housing programs today. We also helped draft the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act, which is the act that allows for a liaison in every school district in the country. Lately, we have been inundated with increasing criminalization of the homeless population. At last count, we were over 180 communities that instead of housing people or providing shelter, they were arresting, fining, and jailing people who don't have any other option but to live outside in our country. Recently, we lost a case at the Supreme Court. Several years ago in Boise, Idaho, we won a case. that also went to actually got ignored by the Supreme Court. That it said very basically that if you didn't have enough shelter beds in your community, that you shouldn't be fining, jailing, and arresting people experiencing homelessness, which makes a lot of sense. One community, a small community in Oregon, decided to ask for an appeal of that decision. That decision was called Martin v. Boise. And they actually took it to the Supreme Court, even though their appeal was rejected by the Ninth Circuit. It actually made its way to this Supreme Court, who decided to hear it anyway. And they actually ruled in favor of the city of Grants Pass. And just a little bit of background on Grants Pass. It's a city that grew very quickly. The leadership in that community did not provide the housing options for the growth. And what happened after that is what happens in every community that makes that decision. They experienced a growth in a unsheltered homeless population. Because of Martin v. Boise, they felt that they were handicapped in how to handle people experiencing homelessness. Now, in this community, they have one shelter. It's a faith-based shelter, which only allows you to come in if you're a part of that religion, if you pray multiple times a day. You can't have pets, and they do not allow people in that don't have either settled mental health or behavioral health issues or other mental health issues. So it isn't accessible to most of the people in that community. So again, they're forced outside, and the idea, what they actually won on is not allowing people to sleep outside in their community. So you can be outside in the community, but you can't sleep. And so we know that that is a fundamental human physiological activity that you cannot go through this life without doing. So they have made it illegal to do that, and you are fined. A couple of the plaintiffs in the case had $5,000 worth of fines. And we know that that only exacerbates homelessness. It does not solve it in any way, and none of these criminalization practices do. And I'll stop there and answer questions. It was a 6-3 decision, and you can probably guess which 6. And so the other thing that came up that it could be also very disturbing if it actually has some traction is there was this idea that some of the justice brought up about homelessness not being a protected class or not being a class in general. And they brought up the Robinson decision. And that decision was where people with substance abuse issues were considered a class. So you can't arrest people because they have substance abuse. There has to be a crime associated with their substance abuse. And so Clarence Thomas actually wrote in his dissent that that should be relooked at. So we may have some more erosion of the rights of people with substance abuse issues in this country. So I see a couple of hands up.
Yeah, Dennis, and then Mike, and looking for Lori Grace if she comes back to join us. Dennis Bernstein, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Donald, and thank you for all the incredible work that you do. And it's the fast track for the criminalization of homelessness, that's for sure. I understand there's a think tank which is associated with the Central Intelligence Agency that's creating a structure, a plan. Maybe I have this a little off in terms of the arrest, the criminalization, the arrest, and then the use of homeless people, sort of being held in camps and doing hard labor. What do we know about formal movements in this direction?
Yeah, there's several of these think tanks that actually that is their design. Now, one in particular, the Cicero Institute.
Yes.
They actually are farming out to state legislatures model legislation that would create these laws, and they've made an impact. I mean, in at least 15 communities, there's been model legislation introduced, 15 states. And, some of it is probably really hard for most to believe. In Tennessee, it's a felony to be homeless with up to 6 years in jail. In Kentucky, they just passed a ordinance that says you can utilize stand your ground principles if people are homeless on your property. So you can use violence up to and including deadly violence in the community. Yes. And so these are a bunch of hedge fund operators, and you have to wonder why they would be interested in this kind of legislation. What is really their driving force when it comes to doing this? And some have associated them with private prisons. And if you go to their website, a lot of their dialogue is about the value of private prisons. So it makes sense. You draw up legislation that gets people arrested, and then you invest in private prisons. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it's a reality. And they've again gotten some traction, but their former directors now at Heritage, and then the former executive director of the USICH is actually also promoting this idea.
What is the USICH?
The USICH is it is the Interagency Council on Homelessness. So it's a council made up of the heads of all the agencies that have responsibility on homelessness. So you have HHS and HUD and Commerce and the parks, the National Park Service, Department of Labor. All of those groups meet. The VA, all of those groups meet to plan strategies to address homelessness. The former director was a gentleman by the name of Richard Marbut, and he has made a lot of money as a consultant. And what he's consulted communities on is these kind of draconian prison camp structures that have people sleeping on the sidewalk. And so that's another group that's really invested in this kind of really ancient thinking around how to address the issue of homelessness.
One quick follow-up, Harv.
Yeah.
Lori Grace is on the screen.
Yeah, we're gonna get to Lori in a sec.
Donald, is there a substantially more in terms of the new growing population of homeless? Is there substantially more women, older women and children as a part of the people ending up on the street?
So there has been a growth in pretty much every population. So women and children, and the system, the shelter system is really set up for middle-aged men for the most part. There is a growth in the senior population. So the majority of the people who actually are unsheltered are 55 and over. There for the first time in several years was a growth in the veteran population. So really across the board, last year was the highest growth in the history, the recent history of homelessness. The Congress has been documenting the numbers since 2007. This was the largest increase since that time.
Raise my hand.
Okay, yes, Lori Grace, Donna, Mike, did you want to jump in real quick because we got Lori Grace here? Can we get?
Yeah, let's go with Lori and get back.
All right,
to me
Lori,
after
you're
that.
unmuted. Go ahead, Lori
Okay,
Grace.
thank you. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
You are good. Yes, go to go.
All right. Well, I just had a few things to add. I've been following 2025 since mid-April and really concerned for it. I sent to you, Harvey, a list from 2025 where every single thing asserted by 2025, I sent you a link, has a page number on it.
Okay.
So I thought that was a useful saver of,
If you can send that to Steve Caruso as well, that would be great.
I don't have his email. I mean, I don't have his.
I'll look for it. Go ahead.
All right, so that's one thing. And I have the specifics on the punishment for Liz Cheney.
Oh.
And she is to be tried in a military tribunal, military trial, and she's going to be tried for treason. And the punishment is either execution or life imprisonment. More likely execution.
Is that laid out in the actual document?
No, it isn't. It was something that I heard and saw, and I can't track it. But it could easily be Google researched, specific punishment for Liz Cheney. And as you know, you're right. And when you look at the Christian nationalism site, they talk about the angel of death getting ready to visit about 25 different prominent Democrats. And another thing is, when you are aware, which I'm sure you all are aware, that the belief among Christian nationalists, who are growing hugely in population, is that God ordained Trump to be the president. And so when Biden supposedly won, it was a rigged election, and it was a slap on the hand of God or the face of God or something. And so they are still holding the same position about God's ordination of Trump, and they see themselves as foot soldiers to be able to make Trump win. So I've been educating people in my film series about Christian nationalism. For any of you who want to get educated around it and its interface with also the Ku Klux Klan, you can go to Bad Faith, the movie, and see the whole history. And so the other thing is so anyway, I have those things, and I have a good friend who's a Republican who apparently is presented on your site too, Ken Bennett, who I admire. I gave him a significant campaign contribution. And then I went to ask him about violence at the when they're counting up the votes, not when they're standing in line, when election day is over and they're counting. And he said he expects violence. So then the issue becomes, what protection is going to be given election officers? So that's another issue. I was hoping that maybe Biden will put out the National Guard to protect these election sites. I don't know, but.
Oh, there you go. Bad Faith.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch that, but not at night.
There's another one, it's a little older, called God and Country. And so when we understand that people are religiously motivated, when we understand that it's like the Crusades, where the Christians came over to try to defeat the Muslims during the Crusades. I mean, these are desperate people. And these people believe they are going to God if they die, okay? This is a very serious issue. And so anyway,
okay. Well, Lori,
we just need to have more protection. I think Biden's got to wake up and get ready to mobilize the National Guard himself. He's supposed to be a president above the law now, or whatever it is. And the issue of violence is significant. And Ken Bennett said it's significant. So
well, it certainly is, and we will continue to revisit this. Lori has been a great supporter of the cause, and we did discuss Leonard Peltier today, which I know is a pet a project of yours. So
yeah,
this is a really, I don't have to tell anybody. Donna Whitehead, one question, and I want to go to Tatanka. People don't understand, and I actually confirmed this with you a couple of years ago. The real root of the homeless problem in the United States is there aren't enough homes.
Absolutely.
And that dates back to Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
In the 1980s, there was a bill, I think it was $65 billion, which was real money back then, to build public housing in this country. And Reagan stopped it. And then with Clinton, there was Senator Louch Faircloth from North Carolina, who passed a bill basically forbidding the building of public housing. Is that an accurate?
And the repair of public housing.
Right. So that's why we have a homeless problem. If we had enough homes, we wouldn't have a homeless problem.
Yes, to add to that, only 1/4 of the people who actually qualify for subsidized housing are able to get it because we don't have enough units. So that's why you see a 10-year waiting list in communities for Section 8 or housing choice voucher programs. The backlog of repairs alone in public housing is in the billion range at this point, in the almost a trillion actually. It's about 70 million in New York alone. So just a huge backlog in the housing costs have increased 18% year over year. So if you think about someone on a fixed income, an 18% rent increase, they're not going to be able to maintain. And if they work a minimum wage job, there's nowhere in the country where you can afford a 2-bedroom at minimum wage. Nowhere in the entire country. Most housing wages are in the $20 to $30 range. So you would have to effectively earn $20 to $30 an hour in a 40-hour work week to be able to afford your housing without being overburdened. The federal government says you should only spend 30% of your income on housing. Everybody who isn't at that between 20 and 30 degree, and actually $20 and $30 range, and it's 40 or more in California, is rent burdened. And some people pay up to 70% of their income for rent. So we have a crisis. Greg Colburn just wrote a book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And if you look at his book, he looks at Detroit versus Los Angeles. Detroit doesn't have the same kind of housing shortage. Although they have greater poverty, they don't have the same kind of housing shortage as Los Angeles. And the population of people homeless in Detroit is significantly smaller because there's still housing available in Detroit and there isn't housing available in Los Angeles. And he goes through those comparisons across the country.
Wow, very interesting. If you can put any references that you want into the chat, that would be terrific. Lori wanted another word on and then we're going to go to Tatanka and then Dennis. Go ahead, Lori. You're muted. Hold on. Why are you muted? There.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
Yeah, go ahead. You got it.
With the software. Okay, so I wanted to let you know there's another thing connected with the violence. And for this, there's another movie that's highly important called Against All Enemies. And this is about the continued enrollment of former vets in the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers because they've given they swore to uphold the Constitution, and they think that supporting the Trump campaign is a part of supporting the Constitution. We have not given our vets good treatment when they come back from our forever wars, we could call them, and they long for a feeling of community and focus. Okay, so this movie goes into this, and there is a big increase in the population of Proud Boys and Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. And when Donald Trump raised his hand and said, "Fight, fight," it was just like what happened where he said, "Proud Boys stand by" in 2020. And so it's going to be, we're going to have blood. And I mean, people have to recognize this. This is not a regular kind of election. So I just wanted to add that, and thank you.
Thank you, Lori Grace, for that. And Donald, thank you. Stay with us, please. Tatanka and then Dennis. You're up. Tatanka and then Dennis. Go ahead.
Yeah. Donald, thank you for coming on the show again. Oh gosh. My question has to do with Housing First, an organization that I think for the last decade has had what is widely acknowledged as the most economically efficient thing, and addresses the part that you brought up, how Harvey, about there not being enough housing. Can you comment on that? Are you still with us?
Oh, I'm still here.
Oh, great. Good to see you. I did meet you about 6 years ago through Joel
Siegel.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I remember. So there that group that we talked about earlier, I should say that not only are they presenting model legislation, their campaign is to persuade communities not to use the housing first approach. And so housing first is a philosophy. It's the idea is that if we really want to address homelessness, we provide housing first. And we also wrap people around with the supportive services that they need to address whatever the issues are that brought them to homelessness in the first place. Now, when you actually are able to provide the housing and have the adequate services, it is successful 90% of the time. And that's for people staying in housing. The challenge is we don't have enough housing. And we also have people that are in opposition to that model that's very, very successful. It started in New York with the mental health population. And someone wrote in the chat that part of our issue is the housing decisions that were made in the 30s that discriminated against people of color. But we also, at the same time, instituted what was a good plan in the beginning, the institutionalization. So I would be dishonest if I didn't say there's a high level of mental health issues for people that are experiencing homelessness. There's a drug epidemic. We have people that are using, some because they want to stop voices and they want to self-medicate, and others because we don't have enough beds in mental health institutions. So that's another part of it. The other part is the failed war on drugs. As you know, the war on drugs was a dismal failure. And to get to the war on drugs, to get the resources, we took money out of schools and we took money out of housing. That's how we funded the war on drugs. And we're seeing the aftermath of all of those structural issues now. And instead of, more beds for people with mental health issues, more treatment beds for people with substance abuse issues, and more housing, what we're seeing is the idea is that putting people in jail. And this is part of an overall war on poverty. So more people in poverty are being arrested and put in jail, and homelessness is the absolute worst of it. Because the people are going right from sidewalks and benches and parks to jail cells, and then it's harder for them to resolve their homelessness once they get out.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take a small disagreement with you. The war on drugs, Donald, the real, as we saw in the brilliant book, the New Jim Crow, by Michelle
Alexander.
Alexander from Ohio State, was published, I believe, in 2010. The real purpose of the war on drugs was to disenfranchise people of color and young people. And it was Nixon's revenge, Nixon's counterattack against the anti-war and civil rights movements.
Right. No. So it was a failure in terms of helping people. It was not it did what it was designed to do. You're absolutely right. I don't, you have no disagreement with me there.
Yeah,
I meant that it was a terrible waste of resources.
Horrible.
That we should have directed towards the core issues that really caused people to become impoverished in the first place.
41 million arrests,
Yes.
for pot, for God's sakes.
And most of it was for possession. It wasn't about drug dealers. It was for people that were using. And there was disproportionate penalties based on the color of your skin.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Can I bring up one more thing, Harvey?
Yes, please, Tatanka, go ahead, and then Dennis.
So about 10 years ago, I served on Citizens Advisory Committee to the sheriff, and the sheriff of Santa Cruz said close to 80% of the people in jail don't belong there. They had the whole thing starting with Reagan, letting people out of just dumping people in the street from the mental health thing, shutting it all down. And basically, they were arguing for reducing the budget to the police department and increasing it for mental health, and to come up with a practical solution. And they cited housing first because it is the most economically efficient way to deal with this. So I guess, yeah, I guess the amount of capital it takes is one of the, I was wondering why it just wasn't adopted wholesale, but you're saying that's it. If you've got the money, if the state and the feds and the cities are willing to allocate it, it would be there, but there isn't the political will, and I guess at times there isn't enough money. Is that right?
That's right. And cities don't use their own dollars.
Yeah.
I guess their own dollars in a way, but most cities don't use their general operating dollars. They use federal pass-through dollars. So
Yeah.
if we had more city dollars that were directed towards housing and other kinds of supportive services, it would make a tremendous difference. But those dollars go into stadiums and other activities that are the playgrounds for people that are more affluent in our country.
Thank you.
So that's how it goes. But I will say this: one of the things, if I leave you with anything, what's really important is that these are not federal laws. I mean, we're talking a lot about the federal legislative agenda on the Republican side. 2025 is very scary. But these are local decisions. The criminalization of people experiencing homelessness is a decision by the sheriff or the mayor or the city council, and sometimes it's the state legislator. So people really, one thing that Republicans did very well is they captured a lot of state houses and a lot of city councils and a lot of sheriff's offices. And we really, really have to focus on reversing that trend. So, think global, act local. I couldn't stress that anymore. Local elections make a difference, and sometimes we don't pay enough attention. And while we're not paying attention, people are being put in jail and dying.
Yeah. And I also want to support all the things that Lori brought up. We really need a mass nonviolent movement to deal with what is going to happen, no matter how the election turns out. And we need to be working on that now.
And I see that Wendy has had her hand up for a while.
We have Dennis, and Dennis may have to run off for his radio show.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dennis
I just wanted to make sure that you guys
Okay.
saw.
Thank you for that, Dominic. Yes. Dennis, go ahead, and Wendy.
Okay, I'm an old man, so I can't remember the precise moment that I was in the Rose Garden with Ronald Reagan as he was announcing with extraordinary fanfare the deregulation of the savings and loans institutions, the Ma and Pa banks of America. That opened the door to a bunch of banking bandits to undermine a key way that poor people and working people had a chance to buy a house. But I'm making that point because out of that came people like Penny Pritzker. Anybody remember her? Hyatt Regency fame. She crashed on SNL in Chicago. 1,400 people lost their money. Everybody wondered, fast forward, how it was that Barack Obama out fundraised Hillary Clinton with her amazing machine. Penny Pritzker, who sunk Superior, who created the notion of subprime lending, which brought us the big bank crash. But we love liberals. And what's the reason why Barack Obama was elected? Because Penny Pritzker ran his campaign. And we got to stop shutting up about, and who's coming down the road, by the way, just as an echo of Penny. Governor Pritzker, is he going to be the next big champion liberal? He's going to save us. He's going to help the homeless and the poor. The liberals have a real problem. And that's why Donald Trump has a chance at becoming dictator again. I mean, and that's homeless. You want to know where homeless, a big boost to homeless, kill the SNLs.
Wow.
Steal them. Let the global bankers do whatever they want with them.
This, I want to point out also, Dennis, that it won't surprise you that the Pritzker family has been a big supporter of nuclear power. And
of course.
This so-called breakthrough in
The new nuclear, yeah.
it's totally nuclear. Of course, Illinois is a big center of nuclear power. Mike, your hand has been, did you want to take your hand down before we go to Wendy, or did you want to say something? You were
No,
up.
I'll go after Wendy.
Wendy, go ahead, please. And then Mike, and folks, we're getting close to the witching hour here. So if you want to say something, please do raise your hand. I want to say hi to Ray Lutz, by the way. Ray, it's good to see you. One of our great election activists, and Lisa Matras, our #1 sports fan, is with us as well. Okay. Go ahead, Mike, and Mike, and then Wendy, or is it Wendy?
Wendy first, please.
Go ahead, Wendy.
Thanks. So yeah, so I'm formerly homeless. During COVID, my plumbing went in the house that I've been an apartment I'd been living at for 13 years. A month after my landlord passed and his daughter took over, I didn't have toilet twice during COVID. No hot water for months and months. And so I complained about this, and I was sued for $30,000 because I couldn't afford to buy a judge. And that's really what's happening. Is the gentrification is the elephant in the room here. It's a war on the poor. I mean, I fought it, and but I just kept thinking about all the people with families. Because my AC also went, the stove, everything fell apart. And there's so many people who don't speak English that can't afford or don't even know what's going on when they get notices. I guarantee there's 500,000 people that are going to sleep on the streets tonight in America while we drop bombs across the world, right? That's completely unacceptable, and it's absolutely disgusting if we actually had some human value for our brothers and sisters. And most of those are preventable. Okay, this is because there's a massive land grab, like what Dennis just brought up, where you have these investors, you have these multinationals buying up all the small places for people to live. You can't build affordable housing unless you tear up green space and public commons. That's the new way to do things. And now, especially in Florida with this insurance crisis, homeowners can't even afford to keep their homes. Millionaires can't even afford to live in Florida and keep their condos. So, I mean, all of these things. And then again, when you go back, you have judges that were never even lawyers. They don't know the law. If you try to represent yourself, doesn't matter what evidence you have. It doesn't matter how many fraudulent claims you prove against you. You will still get hit if you are not within their system. So again, and then if you try to apply for assistance, well, as a single female, I'm not pregnant, so they couldn't give me money unless I get pregnant, which just is completely absurd. And in Fort Lauderdale, you had that 90-year-old doctor that was arrested a few years ago with Food Not Bombs for feeding homeless. And shortly after that, there were all these stickers on like the parking meters about don't be a part of the problem with like feeding another human being. I mean, we have a sick, deep psychosis, and this is going to dovetail off of Dennis's frustration of what we have become as human beings, that we can allow this to happen. But all of these things on how do we cure the problem? You're putting bubble gum on something that is just going to keep flowing and getting so much worse when we siphon the power of what our representatives should have to these corporations, who will then eventually put you in a private prison. And Florida, and Donald Whitehead, thank you so very much for all of this and your work. The breeding ground is Florida right now. DeSantis just passed a law that says that local ordinances, like they can't even do anything about like letting people sleep outside or whatever it is. And even same thing for heat, people like they can't even keep their jobs because they can't work because they don't have heat protection. How are you going to keep your home if you can't keep your job? If you don't have transportation, can't afford public transportation, is too expensive. How are you going to get to your job? There's so many little nuances and little tiny things that don't, he mentioned a shower. What happens when you don't have a shower for 3 days or you haven't slept for 3 days? You're going to smell like a crazy psycho person, and no one's going to look at you like a human being. All of these things could be prevented if we would stop looking at each other as the other and just take, we have to take this back. Like neither side is doing anything to help put value into our humanity. They're only draining it, and it's killing us. And anyway, I'm sorry, but this is really personal to me because I've been there. I was actually homeless when I started these calls. I was zooming in from a tent. You guys didn't even know that, but rock on, we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for that. And it's important to hear from from Ground Zero here. Donald, do you want to jump in and we'll do Sandy Bozenius?
Oh
no, wait, Mike, yeah, go ahead, Donald, go ahead, sorry.
I'll just say, well, definitely thank you, Wendy, for sharing your personal story and being vulnerable enough to give us the real picture of what it looks like. Florida is probably the worst example. To underscore how ineffective criminalization is, Florida used to have something called the Pottinger decision, which made it illegal to actually criminalize homelessness. While that was in effect for 20 years, homelessness reduced by 80%. And Governor DeSantis just decided to reinstate it, starting in Miami Beach. Now, I talked about Grants Pass having one shelter. Miami Beach doesn't have a shelter, but they've arrested 300 homeless people over the last 2 months. So you're at the center of, like, the epicenter of the worst of humanity. And at one time, a few years ago, we did a 60-minute segment because Florida had the highest number of women and children living in cars in the country. And so somebody put in the chat that there's over 650,000 homeless people. That's a tremendous undercount. That is from a point in time survey that happens one time in January, late January every year. But there's millions of people that go through homelessness in this country, and we are just scratching the surface with that point in time count. If you go to the Department of Education, there's actually over 2 million children alone that are homeless in America. So I could go into why there's a difference, but we count people differently. If you live doubled up, you don't count in that 600,000 count. So just horrific stuff. There were studies in Osceola, Florida, that found that 30 homeless people had been arrested 1,500 times at a cost of $6.4 million to the city of to the county of Osceola. And just imagine that throughout the country. And I'll shut up because I can keep.
No, but please, Donald, it's an honor to have you with us. We still have 60 people. I have to say that the people on these calls have the longest attention span of anybody in the country. I mean, we're going for 2 hours now. We still have 60 people with us. It's phenomenal. Sandy Bozenius, or did I skip Mike? Mike, your hand is still up. Did you want to
Yeah,
say
thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Sluggo. I just want to, I don't know if Dennis is still with us, but I wanted to thank him
Yes.
for his very articulate and well phrased tirade against the so-called liberals. I want to point out that there's a huge difference between liberals and neoliberals. A neoliberal is a corporatist that is not liberal. It's not new. It's just corporatism. And they'd be very happy to stand by and watch Trump get elected, whether they have a D or an R after their name. The neoliberals are the enemy. The liberals are okay for the most part. I'm a progressive, and I just want to say that people who try to say both sides are this, both sides are that, don't oversimplify, because we had Pramila Jayapal on recently, and she did a great job presenting on healthcare for all, but she's also got a housing for all bill that won't go anywhere, not because of liberals, but because of conservatives and neoliberals. Liberals and progressives are behind it. Cori Bush has another bill. We'd love to get Cori on. She's very busy defending her seat against AIPAC and right-wingers. But we'd love to have her on to discuss her legislation. I think she had personal experience with being homeless as well.
She does.
And she is an absolute superstar. So do not ever equate MAGA Republicans with Pramila Jayapal, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar. There's so many other wonderful people who deserve better. And let's not oversimplify and start stumbling around and acting like clowns, because we're better than that.
Right.
I'm not defending any particular political party. I don't think that political parties are that great, but there are some champions with D's and after their name, and there are very few with R's after their name. So I just want to
Let me,
make that very clear. And
Great.
I just want to make another few
ahead.
points real quickly. Homelessness, unhoused people, that is a policy choice that we made and we continue making as a society. It's a terrible, corrupt, malignant, horrible choice. And in my darkest suspicions, I think that people who are left unhoused are there as a warning to the middle class not to raise their voices, because there but for the grace of God go you, there but for the grace of your boss go you. And that's the hammer they want to threaten people with, number one. Number two, I've looked into this and I found that, believe it or not, zoning regulations has a big impact on this, because zoning, having a minimum of square footage around each individual home, that makes it much more difficult to provide affordable housing, truly affordable housing. I mean, all housing is affordable to billionaires. And as Wendy was saying, some housing isn't even affordable to millionaires anymore. So if we want affordable housing, we have to make some very serious new policy decisions, have duplexes, low rises, humane places for people to live. And Wendy is absolutely right. We can't gobble up green space. We can reclaim a lot of places that have been abandoned. And somebody put in the chat that the hedge funds are snapping up all the real estate. As soon as it comes in the market, they're paying cash and above market value. They are cornering the market on places to live. And that's a huge threat to all of us. So I just wanted to put all that out there.
Thank you for that, Mike. Very, very well stated. I do want to jump in. I can't resist as a historian. The term liberal and neoliberal, you're right. But the term progressive actually comes from the turn of the last century, the early 1900s, and it was very much a middle class reform movement. That we had socialists who were great democratic socialists as opposed to national socialists. Hitler was a national socialist. Gene Debs was a democratic socialist. We also have social democrats like Bernie Sanders, and the term populist. This just really gets me. The term populist is being equated with fascism. The populists in the United States were very, very human rights oriented. It was a movement that came out of the farming community in the 1890s. They were semi-socialistic. They wanted to take over the banks. They're the ones who gave women the rights to vote. Now that's why the first state after New Jersey, which New Jersey had the women's right to vote until 1808, then got rid of it. The next state to have the right to vote for women was Wyoming in 1869. And that was because of the populist movement. Never, ever call Trump a populist. There was a populist party with a capital P that had a very, very forward-looking social democratic platform. And then the small p populists, these were farm activists who were very, very much into democracy, equal rights, women's rights, and all that good stuff. So that's my spiel on having ranted about the Constitutional Convention. There we go with the term populist. Never allow the term populist to define a fascist. Dr. Nancy, you haven't spoken yet, Nancy Naparko. And Donald, thank you for staying with us. We really appreciate it. Nancy, go ahead.
Sandy Bolsini has been waiting. I don't know if you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sandy was ahead of you, Nancy. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Sandy, go ahead. And then Dr. Nancy.
I'll be quick because I realize it's kind of late. But yeah, so I have some good news. I was at a No NATO event last weekend, and it was fabulous. I went there because I'm with Move to Men and with Veterans for Peace. And Veterans for Peace has recent. And by the way, if you were there, let me know because I'm looking for names. That's great. It was fabulous. I mean, I felt so good. I was really fired up afterwards. But I learned a lot about NATO things that I really didn't know about. And I was able to talk, to educate people a little bit too. And that's about Move to Men. At one point when I introduced Move to Men, a lot of people knew, but not everybody did. And as soon as I said corporations are not people, money is not speech, which is what this We the People amendment will do, I actually got applause. And so I'm going to actually put it in the chat now. I'm really, actually, Veterans for Peace has adopted the We the People amendment, which will say corporations are not people and money is not speech. It has adopted that because they're like, we've been fighting all these years and we can't really get through because the money and the power of these billionaires. So so they adopted Move to Men, which is great. And as one of their ways of working with it, which I shouldn't say they, because I'm part of it too now. And so I'm just really encouraging people to please sign this petition. I think it's in the chat. If it's not, I'll make sure it is by the end of this. But please sign on to it. We hardly send any emails, which is, I know, the reason people don't like to sign things. I'm the same way. In fact, we need your name and we need your address so we know who your constituents are. And once we have
Sandy,
that, yeah.
we're actually going to have a spokesperson from Move to Amend on August 5th. So I hope you can come back and make that wonderful pitch. But we do have a guest who's still waiting to speak
Okay.
up to the housing problem. If you
Okay,
could
I
just
didn't
wrap
realize.
up.
Okay, I'll just wrap up real fast. I just want you to know there are 85 co-signers in Congress now. This thing is not for the future. It's now. It's happening now. 85, and they need our help because people are afraid to sign it, to co-sign in Congress. And so they need to know that we've got more than 500,000 people who signed on. We need more. Please sign that. I'll make sure it's in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Very good. Dr. Nancy, and again, Donald Whitehead's with us. Dr. Nancy, go ahead.
Everybody on this call has made wonderful points, and I think we're all in mostly agreement. I just keep thinking, where did all this come from? And I think we can't lose sight that beginning with Reagan, but it's gone on. We have sanctioned greed and supported corporations, and it explains most of this. I mean, that's why the housing, there's plenty of houses in this country, especially in Santa Monica, where I live, and they're empty because they're all overpriced. It's greed and it's corporations, and we need to change the laws. Enough.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Donald, do you want to comment on the role of the corporations in the homeless crisis?
Oh no, the corporations play a huge role in across many different lines. I mean, certainly in the housing market, Dr. Nancy's right. The corporate interests have really captured a lot of the rental housing market. And I did hear something encouraging the other day about caps on rent increases. So after COVID, because there was a moratorium, landlords have responded by just dramatic rent increases, and that's part of why we're in this crisis. And also the idea of the zoning laws being another form of redlining, if you will, in many communities. But it even goes farther because it actually is responsible for the height of housing, how many units, all of those things, and there is starting to be a little bit of a pushback on some of those zoning laws. So hopefully we can address what is another form of discrimination that's very hidden in our community. So these corporate landlords are funding campaigns, and even the gentleman, even the group that we talked about, the Cicero Institute, one of the ways that they were able to win in Florida and get their initiative passed is they're funding the campaign of the chairman of the House in Florida. And so these are the kind of practices we're seeing from both the corporate landlords and the hedge funds. And so we're fighting a battle that's we can only win with people power. Certainly, we know that when it comes to homelessness, and I agree, this isn't something that happened by accident. This was a well-intentioned plan, and it's only when we come together that we can do something about it.
Thank you, Donald. Tatanka, please.
Yeah, so I'm really moved by everyone who spoke, and thank you, Dennis Bernstein, for showing up. And we all live, as we know, in a criminal cabal. It's corporate capture of every area of government. just a reminder, and I think everyone here already knows this, that whatever the area of resilience we're working on with people, face to face, as Wendy said, not otherizing people. We just have to take the whole left, the whole working class, everyone that isn't the corporate elite, see them as allies, because our resiliency, whether we're working on housing or the corporate capture of energy or whatever it is, the corporate capture of the foreign policy and the forever wars, that resiliency network is going to be absolutely necessary no matter what happens with this election. If we win, it'll be one thing. If we lose, we'll probably be, a government in waiting underground, but it's critical. To Wendy's point about geez, I can't remember which it was, but I wanted to say that oh God, it was something economic. Anyway, the third thing I wanted to mention as we start to run out of time is, yes, Leonard Peltier is still in jail. There's an appeal going on, but the key thing, the only thing there's any hope of him getting out, is to one way or another pressure Biden to do whatever you can. You can look up at Leonard Peltier, Defense Fund, or Amnesty International. Your elected representative, anybody you think, just flood Biden, because Biden's the only thing between him and dying in prison. Okay. And if I remember what I was going to say, I'll speak it. Go ahead.
And remember that Leonard was not sentenced to death. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences, and clearly leaving him in prison is the imposition of the death penalty, which was not part of the kangaroo trial, even the kangaroo trial that he was subjected to. So let's not forget Leonard Peltier in this dying moments here of American democracy.
I know the other thing I was going to say that Wendy brought up, and everybody here probably already does it, but when I start to go down and lose faith, I Google the latest thing that Bernie says. I Google the latest thing that Jamal, I Google the latest thing that AOC, that Jeremy Raskin said. It's really uplifting, and Bernie has not given up on urging Biden to pick up the progressive economic agenda as the talking points for the presidential campaign, no matter who it is, whether it's Kamala or whatever the heck happens with that thing that's going on in the White House. If we state what we stand for as progressives, it is the solution that all the people that are desperate are looking for. We just really need to keep focused on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're down to the last 12 minutes here. We usually stop at the 4:20 witching hour. Dr. Donald, do you want to give us a last word here? It's really been great for you to come on and to stay as long as you have.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that many of you will get involved. We do have a Where Do We Go From Here call on July the 19th. I put it in the chat earlier. I'll send it to Mike, and hope that you all can be a part of what we need to do to end homelessness. It's an issue that requires mobilization and organization, and we're really trying our best to do that. And I see in the chat, I will put that meeting in again. But we hope that you will join us and help us in the fight. Homelessness doesn't have as much of a constituency as most issues because people are so traumatized, they just want to get past it and never see it again. So I'm hoping that people will join us in this fight. We need each and every one of you. And I support everything. I used to be the communications director at Greenpeace. And so I have a history of issues that involve the environment and housing and justice. And I really appreciate all of your work on all of those issues. So thank you for having me.
Donald, it's been great to have you. And next week, Mike, who do we have next week? Mike Hirsch, you still with us? Maybe Mike is gone. MYLA RESON, I want to ask you, we're at the tail end here. MYLA, are you still with us?
Oh, sorry, Sluggo. We have Christian Nunez
Oh, that's
from the
right.
National Organization for Women, and she's got a heck of a lot to talk about.
Well, indeed.
Mike,
And okay,
that's
we're gonna have Heather
okay.
Booth, Steve Caruso. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, that's listed for the 29th. I don't know. Mike Tabor and Nancy
Oh, yeah.
Larson are on the 22nd. Ohio update.
Oh, thank you. That's right. That's right. We got a little
So
ahead of ourselves.
look forward to Christian Nunez on July 29th. Thank you.
Okay.
And we do have move to amend on August 5th.
Great. That's great. All right. Well, listen, everybody. This has been another phenomenal call. We still have more than 40 people with us. And I'm always totally exhausted after these calls. I did want to end on a bit of an upbeat thing. MYLA RESON is a great astrologer. Any of you who believe or even think that astrology is cool, and she says that there has been an astrological situation that's actually right now at its worst peak, and that we're starting to go in the opposite direction. So those of you who care or think about it, my one convincing thing about astrology is that I am a Capricorn, and every time I read the description of Capricorns in the newspapers, they seem dead on. So what can I tell you? Listen, everybody, thank you so much. Steve Caruso, thank you for your great hosting. To Mike Hurst, thank you for bringing Donald Whitehead to us. And Andrea Miller is long gone, but Wendy, thank you for your heartfelt narration. And everybody, will give you an extra 8 minutes to go out and toke up. And meantime, we'll see you all next week, okay? No nukes, everybody, and keep the faith. And this is, as they say, may you live in interesting times. This is as hair-raising as it gets. We're really looking at the beast here. Anna Georgie, good to see you. We hope. Did you want to say something, or are you just waving? Okay. Good luck with beating that pipeline in Western Mass. And everybody, we love you. No nukes. Paul Newman, great to see you as always. And we'll see you all next week.